hope that my thoughts on Final Fantasy VII, which are just like I'm just throwing into the mix, will be interesting to people out there. We'll see. And I got the soundtrack in the background. My opinion in particular, yeah. So, Final Fantasy VII. What even is my history with the game? I talked about it during the stream a lot. I played Final Fantasy VII when I was a child. I didn't have a PlayStation, but a friend of mine had. And I had an N64 and he didn't. So we basically traded consoles for a while. He got my N64 with like Ocarina of Time and I think like Banjo-Kazooie or something. And I got his PlayStation with Final Fantasy VII. Maybe the music a teensy tiny bit less loud. Thank you for that. We can do that. We can do it like this. I got his copy of Final Fantasy VII. I played it. I loved it. I was very certain that I finished it. Until I replayed it. And now I think that I didn't finish it. I definitely finished Disc 1 as a child. But pretty much everything, except for the beginning, like everything from Disc 2 on, I barely remembered. Like, in some cases, not at all. So, maybe this was my first playthrough. I legitimately don't know. But I remember loving it as a child, and I did love it playing through it today as well, like in this era. I played the original, I played it through an emulator, but I do have the Steam version. And I wanted to recreate it, I think, as faithfully as I could. Which I'm not sure if I achieved, but it's the best I could do. Final Fantasy VII is... I mean, obviously it's the first 3D game in the series, and it was a time when all, like, old and trusty video game franchises tried to jump through to 3D. And there were always some weird things that happened when franchises did that. And Final Fantasy VII did change a lot of things, and it did experiment with a lot of things, which I generally adore. They didn't really play it safe in a lot of ways. Obviously, the biggest thing is the cutscenes, which we will get to in a little bit, and just like the overarching story. I feel like Final Fantasy VII is not the first game that... I wouldn't call Final Fantasy VII a fantasy game necessarily. It's almost like a cyberpunk game. That definitely fits the setting more. But that's also kind of true for Final Fantasy VI. Like 1 through 5 are real like fantasy games, and 6 and 7 diverge. And I'm really looking forward to see where the series goes next. The story is wild, absolutely wild. So wild that I had to read up on some things, which I think a lot of people had to do. But overall, it's a great and gripping story. I mean, I was invested in it pretty much the entire time, and the twists that happened, that I'm glad I at least didn't remember, or maybe I never encountered them as a child, really got me. Like that Cloud. Oh, by the way, spoiler warning. I will go into spoilers. This is unscripted, so I can't guarantee not going into spoilers, and I probably will. So I will talk about everything that I have with this game. This is the warning. I should have said that in the beginning. Probably have to mark that for the next time. That Cloud wasn't actually in Soldier, and he was just like an unnamed grunt. During the Nibelheim incident. That was really fascinating. The whole Genova thing and also the like Sephiroth clones. It was a lot. It was a lot of story. But it was also really interesting, and I legitimately wanted to read more about it, which I think is the hallmark of a great story. Same with the characters. I didn't really do a lot of optional stuff, especially late game, because when you play a game on stream only once a week, it kind of tends to drag out, and I tend to forget things from week to week, like especially if they were like months before. And at some point, I said it during the stream, you just want to move on to the next game, even though the one that you're playing, you're having fun with. But I didn't do a lot of optional stuff, so I didn't do a lot of, or like some of the like quest lines for characters. But I still really enjoy like every single character that you can have in your party is a great character. And that, I feel like, is not often the case in RPGs. I'm actually struggling to think of a game that I played at least, where every single character that you can have is pretty good, except for Chrono Trigger. Like even in Final Fantasy VI, which has an amazing cast, I find some characters irritating or just don't really care about them. But in Final Fantasy VII, I cared about characters even that I didn't have in my party, like Yuffie. Or characters that I didn't initially like, but you're not supposed to initially like fully like. Like Catchy, which I think is irritating for a lot of people. But Catchy became one of my favorite characters as time grew. Yeah, it really feels like you're going on an adventure with these characters, and it gets tough from time to time. These characters all have issues that they have to like grapple with, and for a game that came out in 1997, this tackles some serious themes. For a game that was like played by a lot of children, this probably went over the head of a lot of kids that played this game. How... Of course one likes Yuffie. Yeah, I know you do. The one that kind of fell off the road for me was Vincent. I'm sure there's like a character-related storyline that we didn't do. Or like at least an optional quest that we didn't do. But he is an optional and missable character like Yuffie. And we just didn't really get to do anything with him. But I still liked him. Like, yeah, my favorite characters, I mean, Cloud is legitimately an amazing protagonist who goes through a lot of character development. Same with Barrett, who I didn't have in my party for long, but still an amazing character. Tifa and Aerith, of course, at the center of them all. And again, I love Catchy. I had Catchy in my party for the longest time. Not only because he's goofy looking and like a legitimately great mage, but because I also really liked his story of being like this Shinra, like spy in Shinra, controlling this like state fair kind of wacky robot cat. I legitimately like all of the characters. The gameplay is where I definitely have some issues with the game. I mean, it has active time battle system. I personally prefer standard turn-based, but that's really not that big of an issue. I'm just not a big fan of the materia system. It's not bad. I just think it could be more. When it comes to the like gameplay mechanics, where you can actually like customize your party, of the first 7 games, I mean, good, Final Fantasy II is my least favorite, of course. But other than that, it's probably the materia system. I like the Esper system in 6 more. I like the job system more, of course. Big fan of the job system. But it's fine, it suffices. It gives you a lot of options. It's like the Esper system from 6, but simplified somewhat because you don't have to check level ups. You level the materia, but you don't get bonus stats when you level with a certain materia equipped, as you would in 6 with the Espers. It's fine. It was a little bit weird to handle. It didn't like stand out to me. And not standing out to me in a game that is as outstanding as Final Fantasy VII is something worth mentioning, definitely. Overall, the gameplay was very, very good. What this game does, and I think it's because it is the first to go into 3D, it throws a lot of minigames at you. And every time it throws a minigame at you, it has to explain it because it controls differently, it behaves differently. And that was a part, I think around the switch from like second half of disc 1 through like first half of disc 2, where we had a lot of mini games and we had a lot of like text box after text box after text box. That was a bit much, but I do appreciate the variety that they gave you. And even though I didn't play a lot of the mini games, I think it's fun that they're included. But because of the variety, I feel like not all of them really hit. The submarine thing I think it was over in like 25 seconds, and I didn't actually completely understand what I was doing. Same with the chocobo race. Like the first time I didn't, even though I read the instructions twice, that could be a me thing though. I didn't really understand what I was supposed to do differently. But yeah, gameplay otherwise really solid. Same goes for the graphics. I mean, this game came out in 1997, so obviously it doesn't look as great as a modern game. But the backgrounds are really nice. The blocky characters have their charm, and what this game does really well, what I was not expecting, is how much it plays with like different camera angles. Like they really try and succeed, in my opinion, to give this game a cinematic feel with how they place the camera a lot of the times in certain scenes and environments. That was something that I think I mentioned a lot during stream. Every time a weird angle came up, I was like, oh man, this is fascinating. So overall, this game looks very good and has a very distinct sense of style. And I think that that's more important than overall, like, how good the graphics are. Even though they are pretty good. And of course, the cutscenes, for the time, amazing. Like, legitimately amazing. They do kind of bring you out of the game sometimes, but they just look fantastic for 1997. I mean, I can't place myself back to how blown away people must have been at that time. And there were a lot of cutscenes as well. That said, a little issue is with the graphic fidelity, in the truest sense of the word. That sometimes you just can't make out what things are supposed to be. And that's an issue. I mean, I've seen online a lot of people showing the like scene with the yellow bulldozer as an example of people just don't know where the fuck to go. And I struggled. I didn't know what I have to climb and where the ramp was and stuff like that. It's not a big issue for a game as old as this. But it is something that definitely kind of also brings you out of the game when you have to interact with something or find a way and you don't really know where you have to go because you can't decipher what things are supposed to be and where you're supposed to be able to go. But it's not that big of an issue. Sound and music is also something. I mean, you hear the music in the background right about now. The music is amazing. The PlayStation was really capable of like more complex orchestral and also more complex rock songs than the 16-bit consoles. And Nobuo Uematsu took advantage of that so much. I mean, a lot of the music from this game is iconic for a reason, especially One Winged Angel, of course. And I think I can't point to an actual like example, but I'm pretty sure that I mentioned the sound effects during playthrough a lot of the times. They often were like, I mean, very digital, comprised out of a lot of like noise. But I like that, and they were really complex and really created, especially like explosion stuff when you do the big summons. They really gave a feeling of being like big. And that's something that you want from a sound effect. Yeah. 10 out of 10, no notes when it comes to sound and music for this game. Wonderful. Wonderful. But that's something that Final Fantasy games pretty much always excel at. Right from the beginning. Right from Final Fantasy I. Yeah, what a game. I try to limit myself to, like, we're at 15 minutes now, I try to limit myself a little bit going through these bullet points. But I want to take some time for my closing thoughts. I don't want to rush those. This game made a historical impact, not just because it was the first Final Fantasy VII. Of course, it was the first Final Fantasy VII. Not because it was the first 3D Final Fantasy. Not just because of the cutscenes, but because of the entire package this game offers. It was legitimately a step up in, like, making everything bigger from the Super Nintendo era. And you can see that they wanted to push themselves over the top with it. And in my opinion, they succeeded. It gets a lot of flack because it is the Final Fantasy game that gets the most attention from Square Enix. Which is a bit of a shame, because there are also other great Final Fantasy games that deserve a bit of love from the company. But it is legitimately a fantastic game that means a lot to a lot of people, me including now, definitely. It's a wonderful game, and I love that they didn't really play it safe. I like when companies take a lot of risks with their sequels. And they did. I think they did. And I think they really succeeded. I personally still like a lot of other games that came before it more. Like, of course, Final Fantasy III. It's one of my favorites. I personally like Final Fantasy VI more. The long minigame explanations. I don't know if they will continue. We'll see. I have no idea what happens in 8. But this game pretty much shares a spot, I think, with Final Fantasy V now in my heart, which is very high in my list of JRPGs. And I can't wait to see where the series goes next. And I'm really looking forward to replaying this game on my own terms, in my own time. Seeing all the things that I missed, playing it with different characters, getting more of the lore. I want to play Crisis Core. I bought it on sale to get like more of the background lore. I may play the remake trilogy once it's like completely out. I understand why people are fascinated with this game. And why it means so much to them. It's legitimately amazing, and I'm so glad that we played it on stream. That the reactions that I gave to some of the things that happen are captured on stream, like, and archived on YouTube and like real time. Because you can't fake those reactions. Yeah. Those are my thoughts on Final Fantasy VII. This was fun to do. We'll do it for the other Final Fantasy games as well, and retroactively for 1 through 5. This was a lot of fun, and I hope I conveyed my appreciation for this game, and I hope that people get something out of this. We'll see. We'll see how it is.